The city was a living nightmare, a place where justice was just a word whispered in fear. Crime thrived under the watchful eyes of those sworn to stop it. In this world of shadows, one man had lost everything: his name, his family, his faith. Arav had once been a man of honor, a soldier who believed in duty. That was before betrayal ripped through his life like a bullet. Framed for a crime he didn't commit, hunted by the system he served, he had no choice but to disappear. His wife and child, the only light in his world, were taken from him in an orchestrated car crash. The authorities called it an accident. He knew better. For years, Arav became a ghost. He buried his past, trained his body, sharpened his mind. He studied his enemies, the men who profited from the misery of others, who hid behind power and corruption. He knew justice would never come for them through the courts. It had to come another way. The city spoke of him in hushed voices. A whisper. A name. Jalad. The executioner. The first target was Bhairav Singh's human trafficking operation. A warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a fortress of suffering. Inside, young girls were chained like animals, their freedom sold to the highest bidder. The police knew. The politicians knew. No one acted. But tonight, the city would see the wrath of Jalad. The guards patrolled lazily, laughing, smoking. They didn't see the shadow moving among them, silent as death. A flicker of motion. A knife slashed through the air, one guard down before he could scream. Another turned, reaching for his gun, but a steel cable tightened around his throat. No noise. No mercy. Inside the warehouse, Bhairav's men counted money, their laughter echoing. It stopped when the lights cut out. Panic. Shuffling feet. A voice, trembling with fear. Who's there? A whisper in the darkness. Justice. Gunfire erupted blindly, bullets hitting walls, breaking glass. When the emergency lights flickered on, they revealed a massacre. Bodies slumped over tables, throats slit, eyes frozen in terror. One man remained. Rajat, Bhairav's lieutenant. He crawled backward, pleading, his hands shaking. Please, I have a family. Jalad stepped forward, his face hidden beneath the mask. His voice was cold. So did they. A single shot rang out. The warehouse burned behind him as he walked away, sirens wailing in the distance. The city had been warned. The executioner had arrived. The city woke up to a nightmare. News channels flooded with images of the burned warehouse, the bodies left behind, the whispered name, Jalad. Some called him a savior, others a murderer. But in the underworld, he was something worse. A storm they couldn't control. Bhairav Singh seethed in rage. His empire was untouchable, built over years of blood and money. Yet, in one night, Jalad had shattered his operation. He knew fear spread fast, and if he didn't respond, his men would start questioning his power. He needed a message, one drenched in blood. A bounty was set, 10 million for Jalad, dead or alive. The city's worst crawled out of their holes, hunting a ghost. But ghosts don't fear the dark. They own it. Meanwhile, ACP Vikrant studied the crime scene. He had seen brutality before, but nothing like this. Every move was calculated, precise. Jalad wasn't just a vigilante. He was a tactician, a soldier. The method of execution, the pattern, it felt familiar. Then it hit him. Arav. Vikrant had worked with Arav once, back when they both believed in the system. When Arav vanished, he assumed he was dead. But if Arav was Jalad, it meant this wasn't random violence. It was personal. While Vikrant connected the dots, Jalad prepared for his next target. Rajesh Malhotra, a politician with a spotless public image and a hidden empire of human trafficking. The kind of man who smiled for cameras while selling lives in secret. That night, at a gala filled with the city's elite, the lights cut out. A single screen flickered to life, playing footage of Malhotra's crimes, hidden transactions, recorded conversations, faces of victims. The crowd gasped, chaos erupting. Malhotra ran, but there was no escape. Jalad found him in a back hallway, trembling, stuttering excuses. I can pay you. We can talk. A gunshot ended the conversation. By the time security arrived, Jalad was gone, leaving behind only fear. The city's elite knew they weren't untouchable anymore. Vikrant stood in his office, staring at Ariv's old file. The pattern was clear. Bhairav was the final target. But Vikrant had a choice: stop Jalad now or let him finish what the law never could. Jalad, meanwhile, prepared for his endgame. Bhairav Singh wouldn't hide. He would fight. And Jalad was ready. Jalad knew the stakes were higher now. Bhairav Singh was not just another criminal. He was a symbol of the city's rot, a man whose reach extended into every corner of power. To destroy him would mean crippling the entire foundation of this city's corruption. But Bhairav wasn't the kind of man who would go quietly. Vikrant, too, had shifted. The more he uncovered about Jalad's methods, the more he felt like he was chasing a ghost, someone who had already crossed every line he swore to protect. And yet, as a lawman, he could never let that ghost be free. He needed to stop him. But as he studied the files, he couldn't help but wonder if Jalad was doing what the law failed to do. The trap was set. Bhairav had grown desperate. He knew Jalad would come for him next. So he made a decision. He would bait the man out. He would take innocent lives, force Jalad into the open. He knew Jalad was driven by rage, by vengeance, and that kind of hatred had its limits. Sooner or later, it would consume him. Bhairav's men attacked a crowded market, spraying gunfire into the crowd, leaving chaos in their wake. His message was clear: "Come to me, Jalad. Save them if you can." Jalad didn't hesitate. The screams echoed through the night as he moved like a shadow through the destruction. He worked swiftly, taking down Bhairav's men one by one, no mercy in his movements. But every life he saved meant another bullet fired in his direction. He had no choice but to fight. In the middle of the chaos, Vikrant arrived. He wasn't here to arrest anyone, he was here to stop the madness. The sight of the carnage, of civilians caught in the crossfire, only deepened his resolve. He was right. The man he once knew was lost, drowning in vengeance. The line between justice and revenge had long since blurred. But there was no time to stop it now. The clash between Jalad and Bhairav's men intensified, and Vikrant found himself at the center of the battlefield. They fought side by side, each knowing they were on opposite sides, yet bound by a common goal: survival. The battle raged until it was over, the market left in ruins. Bhairav's men were dead or scattered, but the cost was steep. Vikrant was wounded, his body battered. He knew he couldn't let this continue. He had to stop Jalad. But the man who walked away from the wreckage was no longer Ariv, no longer the man Vikrant once trusted. Jalad disappeared into the shadows, leaving only destruction in his wake. But his next move was inevitable. He would find Bhairav. The final reckoning was at hand. Vikrant stood in the silence, watching the destruction. Somewhere deep inside, he knew this was just the beginning. The war for the city had only just begun. The city was quieter now, but the tension in the air was palpable. Jalad had broken the system, dismantled its pillars, and the streets were filled with whispers of what he had done. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. Not until Bhairav Singh was gone. Bhairav knew it was coming. His mansion, once a symbol of untouchable power, now felt like a prison. Guards patrolled the perimeter, but even they couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. They had failed once before, and it was only a matter of time before Jalad would strike again. Jalad wasn't just hunting. He was cleansing. And now, with Bhairav as his final target, the executioner's work was nearly done. He had everything planned. Every route, every guard, every moment of vulnerability. He moved like a shadow, undetected, precise. Inside the mansion, Bhairav paced nervously. His empire was crumbling, his men falling one by one. Panic gnawed at him, but his pride kept him from running. He would stand his ground. He would die on his terms. The first guard fell before anyone could react. Then another. And another. In moments, the mansion's security system was offline, the halls drenched in silence. Bhairav stood in the heart of the mansion, holding his gun with trembling hands. His empire had fallen, but he still had power. He still had hostages.
He still had a chance to live.
But it was futile. Jalad appeared, as inevitable as the night, standing before him like a figure of judgment. The man who had once been Ariv, the soldier who had fought for a cause, now a ghost of vengeance. You took everything from me. Jalad's voice was cold, like the death he had become. Berov's eyes flickered with fear, but his defiance never wavered. You think killing me will end this? There's always someone else. Always another to take my place. Jalad didn't answer. He didn't need to. Berov's words were nothing but empty threats, the desperate cries of a dying man. The shot rang out, quick and final. The city's last great criminal was gone, and with him, the fragile illusion of order. Jalad had succeeded in his mission, but there was no sense of victory. As he walked away from the wreckage, the weight of what he had done settled on his shoulders. Justice, if it could ever be called that, had been served. But at what cost? The Krant stood waiting. He had known this moment was coming, but nothing could prepare him for the final confrontation. He raised his gun, aiming it at Jalad, but the man who had been his comrade, his friend, was no longer the person he had known. You should have stopped, the Krant said, his voice heavy with regret. Jalad didn't flinch. There is no stopping.
Not now.
In that moment, the Krant knew what had to be done, but he couldn't bring himself to pull the trigger. Instead, he lowered his gun, watching as Jalad disappeared into the night. The city was broken, but as long as Jalad remained, the battle would never truly end.